Hello, juniors. Hope you guys had a lovely week. Last week, we were taking kind of an overview of Christianity, and I realized for a lot of you, this is review because this is stuff you studied in class, right? Stuff that you or should already be well aware of. But nonetheless, it's good to have these kind of reviews. It's good to have these. Uh, um, yeah, it's good to see it within context of all of the other world religions. Um, so let's continue. Last time we talked about this idea of saving. Jesus is God Himself who has become a man. And having become a man, he came man for several purposes. One of the major purposes to be being able to save us from our own iniquity, from our own issues, from our own problems. So we've done bad things, and these bad things have an effect on us that is extremely detrimental. That's a real problem. The detriment being that because of what we've done, we no longer deserve the goodness for which we were made. So herein we enter into some other basic understandings of Christianity that we need to kind of be able to cover all these things. One of these things is that Christians believe that there is a defined heaven and a defined hell. So, in other words, very often we can make the mistake of thinking that because Christians generally are very loving people and God is loving as well, that this particular doctrine can be quite hard to understand where it comes from. So let me kind of just explain it. Christians believe that there's a heaven, and heaven is, by its very nature, us, the human person, being in God's presence for all eternity. That's what it is. Well, what is God? Well, God is all goodness, all being, all existence itself. So I somehow align myself to all of that goodness for eternity, and this is heaven. But it's only heaven under one circumstance. It's only heaven if I want that. Like if I look at goodness and love and beauty, and I think that's good stuff that I like, then that's heaven. Being surrounded by nothing but goodness, beauty, and humility, and kindness, and gentleness. This is exactly what I've always wanted. That's great. But what if it's not what I wanted? What if, in the end of the day, I don't really care about anything or anyone except for myself? Well, then that wouldn't be heaven. It wouldn't be good at all. That would be a torture, right? To be surrounded by all of the goodness of and beauty of the world. If I hate beauty and goodness, then that's not heaven. So here's the fundamental Christian idea, is that when God made us, He made us to be eternal beings, that you and I are we're made for an eternal existence. In other words, there's no way to unmake you. Like, you're permanent. Once you were made, you can never be unmade. So your soul and later your body are going to be eternal things. So this is a problem. And here's the Christian idea, and it's actually quite genius if you think about it. Here we go. Imagine for a moment that every day from now until the end of your life, you got just a little bit better. Just a little bit better. Like better as in more of a good person. Just a little itty bitty bit of a day. I mean, you probably would never notice it, but just this little itty bitty bit a day. Every day you get just a little bit better. Well, at the end of your entire life, that little bit might not add up to much. You might just be a little better when you're 10 years older than you were 10 years before. But expand that time frame to eternity. Make it infinite. And what you'll find is that little bit of betterness will make you, over centuries, over millennia, over eternity, will make you incredibly good, right? That you become light itself by the end of it all. But the same thing's true if we get a little bit bad, right? If we become just a little bit darker, a little bit more self-centered, a little less caring about others, a little less, just a little bit every day, well, in the span of a lifetime, it might not actually be that big a difference. But in the span of eternity, it will turn you into Satan himself. It's just time. So Christians recognize that as we're eternal beings, that there's a natural trajectory that we can't seem to get out of that's polarizing. We're either going to become extremely heavenly or we're going to become hellish. And we're going to do that on our own. This isn't something that God's doing to us. This is something that we are doing to ourselves, right? So God's trying to save us from making the mistake of becoming hellish creatures. And hellish creatures will not be happy in heaven. It's not like people in hell. I mean this. It's not like people in hell want to go to heaven. They don't. They're exactly where they want to be. They want nothing to do with it because who they are has become eternal. It's become completed. It's become whole. So for the Christian, our task in this life is to become heavenly as much as we can. The way Jesus put it is he said, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, does Jesus think that we can be perfect? Well, of course he does, or he wouldn't have said it, right? I think he knows that we can't maybe do that fully in this life, but I certainly knows that we can be perfect. In fact, we must be perfect. So there's a whole lot of impetus on what it is that we're going to do, on our actions. So you're going to find that a lot of Christianity talks about morality, talks about trying to do and be goodness in the world, right? Because that goodness, every little bit of goodness that we can muster, all of that has eternal ramifications. Think about this. From the Christian perspective, every single action you take that is a good action has eternal ramifications. That every little small thing you do that is good is eternal in nature. In other words, every single little thing you do matters forever. And the same is true for every evil thing, that every evil thing we do matters forever. So this is the dichotomy that man is brought into, and this is exactly what Jesus is trying to save us from. He's trying to save us from becoming the thing that we really don't want to be. He's trying to help us become the thing that we know we really do want to be. And that's where we're at. We're in this strange in-between space. So now, here in our humanity, we have a choice. And the reason we have a choice is that decision of what trajectory, which we're going to take for eternity, which road we're on, that now is hidden from us. Like we can't see just how big it all is. We're kind of blinded, and we're blinded by God's will. God's desired us to have time to kind of work this out on our own before he opens our eyes and shows us eternity. Because once we see eternity, we're going to go where we're going to go. We're going to either soar like an eagle or fall like a rock because we'll see reality and we'll choose. And there's no getting around that choice. So what God has done is stalled it. He's paused the choice. He's given you and I the chance to kind of work it out. And he's invented this idea of time for you and I to be able to work through this. And that's the Christian idea. Now, how do we know all this is what it is? Well, at the end of the day, what proof does Christianity hold? What is its evidence? Right? So Christianity says all these crazy things, heavens and hells and angels and God and all sorts of stuff, right? We have cross and redemption and saving and all sorts of what is the evidence for this? Well, there's a lot of different evidences. Christianity is very heavy in the use of reason. In other words, thinking about things deeply. But most important of all is this idea of what we call the resurrection. All right, now resurrection for the Christian is one of the central most important things that happens. Remember, Jesus himself is the most important thing, and therefore Anything having to do with him is important. Resurrection's the big one. Here's what happens. After that death, where Jesus dies for our sins, where he somehow enables us to be able to gain heaven by our marrying ourselves to him. After he does this, he does another thing. And this second thing he does is merely a proof saying that he actually is who he says he is and did what he said he did, right? Notice at this point, all the work is done. Everything is complete. Everything that he's wanted to tell us, he's told us. Everything that he's wanted to give us, he's given us. And he's already died on the cross for us. He's already done all the things, right? But you and I, we have to have some proof that this stuff is really real. So what he does is he raises from the dead. Now, I want to make sure you understand, I'm not talking about a resuscitation. A resuscitation is when somebody's been dead for 5-10 minutes tops, and the doctor's got the paddles and they shock them back to life. It's like the body's been put on pause. It's like there's a wonderful movie called Princess Bride. I love this movie, but there's this part where they bring him to the doctor, Max, right? And he says that he's only mostly dead, right? That he's not completely dead. There's nothing dead. And there's a wonderful joke in there. He says, if they're dead, there's nothing you can do but check for pocket change. But mostly dead, well, we can do something about that. And when we're talking about resuscitation, we're talking about mostly dead. We're talking about people who have had a heart attack and their heart stops and they stop breathing. And for us, that's death. But it's not complete death. I mean, the cells are still working and then there's still things happening in the body. It's not total death. It's mostly dead. But we're talking, what Jesus does is he's dead for days, for 3 days, completely gone. He's been tortured to death. He's bled out just about everything that he has. They've literally shoved a spear into his heart, right? After torturing him and hanging him on a cross for hours. The guy is toast. There's nothing left of this guy. And then 3 days later, he raises from the dead. He comes back like nothing happened and appears in miraculous ways. He just suddenly starts appearing in front of them. They think he's a ghost at first. They're like, whoa, there's a ghost. This is creepy. And he says, no, I'm not a ghost. Here, bring me some food. I'll sit down. I'll eat with you. And eat some fish. And they're just astounded. They've never seen anything like this. Some of the apostles who weren't, one of the apostles that wasn't there, his name was Thomas, didn't even believe him. Didn't believe all the guys. He's like, I have no idea. He was dead. I know what dead is. And sure enough, Jesus comes and speaks with him. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, there's lots of wonderful miracles that have been done in history. There have been lots of great magic tricks too. But coming back from the dead beats them all. You see, when I do a miracle to something, that's all sure, that's impressive. But when I might do miracles of my own self, that's something different. Paul says this best. If the resurrection didn't happen, then everything we believe is a lie. If the resurrection was just a magic trick, then everything we believe is a lie. If the resurrection, if Jesus was not raised from the dead, if this proof is not a true proof, then every single thing that Christians hold dear is simply untrue through and through, without question. The resurrection of Jesus is the proof for which all Christians rely on, right? Why do we believe that Jesus was God? Because of the resurrection. The second he was risen from the dead, this is something no human has ever done in all of history. This is something no human has even pretended to do in all of history. This is something completely different. This man was put under the most gruesome torture and death that mankind has ever known. And then, 3 days later, miraculously, is practically magically appearing in front of his apostles, is seen by thousands of people, is teaching and saying, giving the last final words before he rises into heaven. This is a proof. This is the proof on which Christians rely. Now, one of the big challenges in our modern times is a lot of people don't believe the resurrection actually happened. And that's one of the big challenges to Christianity, is there was no resurrection. The whole thing is a myth. But that doesn't really hold water. And let me tell you why. Christians were a problem. You see, the people didn't want Christianity to really exist the way it was existing. They didn't want this new thing. The Jews hated the new Christians. They were called the followers of the way, and they would kill them because they hated them so much. So if all they had to do was prove that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, that wouldn't have been a hard task. It wouldn't have been challenging. I mean, at the very least, all you got to do is produce a body. Show me the body, and we know. And realize it's not like the Christians had the body. The Romans had the body. The Romans killed him. They buried him. They put him in a basically a big stone cave, rolled a massive stone in front of it, and that was that. The Christians were all scattered and run away. If the Romans wanted to shut this thing down, all they would have had to do is show a body, and the whole thing would have died that day. But that didn't happen. In fact, that was a big problem, this lack of a body. And then there's another problem. The other problem is the witness of these apostles. You see, all these people who saw Jesus, not just the apostles, but the disciples, all the different disciples, thousands of them as well. But there were so many witnesses that actually saw Jesus afterwards that it was kind of impossible for anybody to refute. You see, when that many people see what happened, saw him crucified, and then afterwards see him resurrected from the dead with light beams coming out of his wounds, is something you don't forget. And almost every one of these apostles died because of their belief in this. So this whole thing about the resurrection is a pretty darn big deal. And it's not something simple to refute as one might think. The only people I know who refute the resurrection are people who haven't really studied it. But the second you start taking a close look and you really start to try to understand what was happening, and you really pull out the evidence that we have, it's one of the most believable events in all of history. And if that happened, then that means that all those other things that Jesus said suddenly have an air of authority. And this is what Christians rely on. So, what do Christians believe? Well, of course, they believe that Jesus was God himself made man, and that Jesus came to save us from our sins, and saving us most particularly from hell, from an eternal punishment that we've inflict upon ourselves, in which we become the exact thing that we hate. So God's trying to protect us from that. And so he saves us through Jesus. Beyond this, why do we know this happened? Well, we know this happened because of the resurrection. The resurrection is the proof of Christianity. It's one of the most important things there is. The other thing to note is that everything in Christianity is, and I really get a chance to talk about this a lot, is moves through the witnesses to Jesus. So we call these people the apostles, and they're the ones who went out and told the world about Jesus. So this whole community of God, this kingdom of God, is going to be super important for Christians. So they always do things together, which is why they go to church together. Hindus don't do that. They can go worship on their own on a mountain. Christians don't do that. Christians worship in groups. They stay together as community because that's what Jesus told them to do. So you're going to find that church or community is super important to Christians. But yeah, that gives you a basic general overview. Hopefully, you feel like you have a good idea what's going on there. And happy to answer any questions as they come along. God bless you. I hope you have a beautiful day. Next week, we begin Islam. Take care.